joining us from Montreal, Vivek Venkatesh. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here. We've done a bit of research into your background, and we thought you would be the perfect person to have this interview with today, or dialogue/interview with today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much, and obviously, I'm excited to be part of this conversation, and I hope that I can learn as much from our conversation as you hope to take away from the work that we're doing in my team. So we really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, it's really great to have you. I mean, in the time that we live right now, of social media, trying to find a balance, but also indeed being part of a team that works on social polarization, that works on prevention of radicalization. We're very, very interested in the topic of social media, democracy, and trying to prevent radicalization, but also social polarization. So if you don't mind, I would just love to start off with more of an introductory question. So it is said that social media is a good servant but a bad master. And maybe some of us of participating now in this conversation, but also people that are watching online, might have seen the recent documentary, The Social Dilemma, which for some people might have been shocking. For me, definitely. And yeah, I really wanted to ask you, social media is a good servant but a bad master, but how should we or can we balance our use of both the internet and social media to reap the benefits, but without being so technologically addicted to them?
It's great that you start with the most loaded and most difficult question, because that's, I mean, I guess one way to think about this issue and to begin a dialogue about this issue is to perhaps separate the phenomena that we're observing, right? I think technology, on the one hand, is a very easy target for being a villain, especially in the present age, and I think it would be an error to impute some of the problems that we're observing in human behavior, whether it's about being discriminatory, being prejudicial, sharing misinformation. It would be difficult to impute all of that problem specifically to the technology itself. I think that there's a lot of blame, so to speak, to be shared by human beings themselves. And so this is where I think that the issue of balancing and trying to find out what in fact should we be doing so that we are able to comport ourselves, behave in a more humanistic way, is not just a problem that should be confined to technology companies or to psychology and psychiatry, or to cultural preservation, or to even pedagogy. I think that all of these disciplines need to come together to better understand these kinds of questions. You know, when I started researching, and this seems like a lifetime ago, but it wasn't, when I started researching the ways in which people converse in online environments, this was in the beginning of the year 2000s, right, when I just begun my career in the field of educational psychology and educational technology. We started looking at conversations that were taking place in online fora, text-based online fora. And it's not that long ago that we were able to analyze and even uncover some very, very consequential conversations that were being undertaken by people to discuss some very, very difficult topics. One of the manuscripts that we published focuses specifically on the question of the Second Gulf War And so there were several people who contributed to an online forum, a text-based forum, right? This is actually the closest thing you can see to that now is Reddit, right? Where it's pretty much just text-based responses. So we were looking at about an 8 to 9 month long conversation with about 12 to 13 individuals who were very committed. And so one person was a veteran of the US Army and spoke specifically about their experiences in the war and how it led them to believe that they were actually fighting an illegal war. So there was a lot of questions around that. There was one person who claimed to be, or at least became, over the course of the 8 or 9 months that we were observing these conversations, came to be the person who said, I'm going to verify everything that's being said. So he would go out and seek out articles and policy papers and gray papers and say, okay, this information that this person provided, I verified it here. Another person was very much protecting, for example, the sovereignty of nations who went into wars and said, look, it's our right to go into war if we are threatened. And so we must be able to argue for that as well. What we found here in our analysis was that it's important for the technologies to be designed so that we are able to create spaces for pluralism. And by this, I mean, we need to be able to listen to each other's voices, especially, and I have to emphasize this, especially when we disagree with that perspective. And so, I guess in a roundabout way, I'm trying not to answer your question, but at the same time, what I'm also saying is that, there is a certain balance, to go back to your question, there's a certain balance that we should try and achieve in the ends that we'd like to see through the use of social media. Because sure, there are political ends, there are economic ends. We're all well aware that the technology companies in social media that are operating right now are doing mainly for profit, right? And so therefore, any questions of censorship and any questions of banning content can necessarily lead to a reduction in business. So there is a business model to consider here. But I think our responsibility as users of social media should be that we have to behave responsibly, and not everyone thinks the same way about behaving responsibly. So we have to keep an open mind about how others are expressing themselves on social media, and not necessarily end up into these ad hominem attacks. Maybe I might address that a little bit later in terms of how perhaps we could behave, because we have done some research in this regard. But I hope that sort of gives us a good basis to start off our discussion.
Sort of to go back to a place where we can engage without having to agree with someone.
Yeah, it's a good point you make, because what you're in fact alluding to, Eva, is that we tend to learn and we tend to be taught how to build consensus. This is something we see in debates. We see this in politics. And very often, if you think about debates, you are designing your arguments so that you can put down your opponent, right? And in a pluralistic space, if you try and build consensus too quickly, then there's going to be a dilution of arguments. You're not going to be able to hear the other person out, hear the other person's rationale out to the final piece. And it's not a question of them being wrong versus you being right. I think it's really a question of differing values, differing perspectives, differing presumptions, differing experiences that lead you to believe in a certain ideology or philosophy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that would be great. I mean, I feel like, and I'll finish up here with this question, but I feel like we've gotten to a place where we bias despite our faces, in a sense that if we have a certain political identity or a certain religious identity and we don't fully agree with something that is within, that fits that identity, we will not be honest and come out saying, I don't fully fit with this group, and I might actually agree with like one little piece of what my opponent is proposing. So yeah, if that like pluralism sort of could come back online, I think that would be actually quite healing to the societies that we live in right now. So thank you very much.
May I continue with a question that maybe goes a bit in a different direction, but kind of also continues the idea? We cannot deny that social media, internet, enables more active participation of citizens and contributes to citizen engagement, to democratic processes, to promotion of human rights, freedoms. But we can also not deny that it exposes us to disinformation. So my question would be, would you have some recommendation on how to avoid falling into the trap of misinformation and also so-called fake news?
Yeah, I think, first of all, that's a very pertinent question. And I think it's a pity that we are only discussing, not us as a group here, but that in general, society is only discussing the question of misinformation, disinformation, or fake news in an era where we are I guess, shut down due to this pandemic, and where we aren't necessarily socially engaged face to face as we used to before, and that we are relying on the means that are being provided to us via media, whether it's via social media, television, radio, alternate media. I think the question of disinformation or misinformation is definitely not new, and I think you would agree with me that we have faced the issue of being fed with falsehoods in order to promote a certain political, a certain economic, a certain ideological end. The main thing I think that we need to be focusing on, and the investment that is needed, is in building a form of critical digital literacy. Right? And this is very different from what we think about as information literacy, or what we think about as well as just traditional forms of literacy. I think in a critical digital literacy, you want to engage in a process whereby people can become reflexive, so that they're constantly thinking about how much or to what extent can I trust the information that is being brought forth to me. The second thing you also want to do is you want to basically teach people to be more inclusive, in the sense to be accepting of multiple viewpoints. And I'll give you an example of this, because you find situations where there are bipartisan ways of thinking, right? You're either, let's say, just traditionally either conservative or liberal in orientation. And so it's very easy for you to continue to retain your conservative thoughts by reading conservative media, by exposing yourself or by being exposed to conservative ways of thinking, reading literature that's conservative. Whereas on the other hand, you can say that if a conservative platform was more accepting of or presented viewpoints which challenged the issues that were being brought forth, then it would teach you to be more critically digitally literate, because you would then be thinking about in what ways is this particular viewpoint valid? In what ways does it fall flat? I think what I'm trying to say here is that every viewpoint, unless we're having an argument about facts, right? Facts are what they are. And this coming from a person trained in statistics, I don't know if you're aware of this really famous saying by Groucho Marx. I would consider him one of the preeminent philosophers, although he made his name through comedy. But he basically said there's lies, damn lies, and then there's statistics. So you can sort of make statistics say what you want them to say, but when you have facts that are presented to you and those are immutable, then how is it that you present those facts? How is it that you present that information? So to be critical and to have a critical viewpoint and to be digitally literate, I think means not falling prey to misinformation, because you are going to validate the viewpoints that are presented to you. You're going to purposefully listen to viewpoints that are different, and question. All right, is there something that's missing with the philosophy that I am ascribing to? This takes a lot of courage, actually, right? Because if you call yourself conservative, then there, in a certain sense, you are meant to ascribe to a certain set of beliefs. And the moment one of those beliefs gets called out, you go, oh my God, am I as conservative as I thought I was? It's typically easier in a country like Canada, where we have very centrist ways of thinking. Like, our governments are neither too left-leaning nor too right-leaning. Sure, people might argue that they're in some policies are a bit more socialist or leftist than others, but most of our government policies are centrist in orientation. We encourage the role of the government in providing for social care for our citizens, and at the same time, we also think that too large a government is not that good, and therefore provinces have a lot of say when it comes to delivering education and healthcare, for that matter. But in bipartisan communities, there's a much bigger chance that disinformation is going to run rife. So I think the best thing to do to counter this issue of misinformation is to expose yourself to multiple thoughts and multiple ways of thinking, to not shut yourself out of these, but to also take the time to step back. You know, to be blunt, I think we need to learn to shut up a little bit more and to reflect. So, a viewpoint has come through that you don't agree with, and the first thing you do is you go on Twitter, you go on Facebook. I don't have those social media accounts, but you go on them and then you start saying, oh, I disagree with this, and how dare you, and there's a certain indignance. This being said, I have to say that there have been some really important movements and groundswells that have demonstrated how minority communities, marginalized communities, racialized communities, indigenous communities have been treated abhorrently across the world. And it's important that that indignance that is shown by those communities is given a voice. It is magnified, right? But I'm thinking of persons like myself. I can't speak for anybody else on this call, but persons like myself, the thing I need to do is take a step back and listen, and not feed a particular narcissism or egotism our education and our privilege has given us, to just continuously feed this vast boiling pot of I guess clashes, which really don't lead anywhere except pushing people into their respective, what we call, echo chambers. But anyway, we can talk about that.
Very interesting. So if we want to avoid misinformation, try to find the antidote to narcissism. That would be
that's I guess this would be interesting to ask a psychologist about egotism and developing your identity. It's really important, right? And it's especially important for marginalized peoples, right? I mean, think about the struggle that it's taken for women to be fairly represented in society, to have equal voting rights, to be treated as equal to men, to be given the same pay as men. We're still struggling with that. I mean, I was just astounded at just recent reports about pay structures in varieties of industries where women are still paid less than men. That is ridiculous. And now we are being asked to pay attention to the marginalized communities and racialized minorities and indigenous communities. I mean, the intersectionality of this is horrific to think about, right? And it's been more than, I'd say, 100 years that women have fought for the right to be treated equally, and yet they're not being treated equally, despite the fact that we think we're making, and I hope we're making, more and more progress. So the fight is long, and it's hard, and it's arduous for equality. And I think that underpins some of this conversation here. And I think somebody mentioned it, or at least someone mentioned the question of human rights. And I think for that, I think the United Nations and UNESCO have it right in continuing to emphasize the role that we must play in ensuring human rights are not violated. You can see this really gets me riled up.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, I think it's my turn to ask a question. Vivek, thank you for your answers. You already addressed my question, and I think you already called my question to be asked. You already mentioned about pluralism and inclusiveness in the social media. But my question is like, does social media actually bring citizens together to share their ideas or to being more inclusive and pluralist, or does it merely polarize the society through the creation of echo chambers? So,
Yeah,
short
this
question,
is
but I
really.
think it's going to be long answer.
I'll try to keep it short. You know, my poor students, sometimes they complain. It's like, oh my God, he's going on. He's just going on and on. You know, you can see some
No,
of their
please.
faces on Zoom. They're like, oh, it's too much. But I think this is a really good point that you make, Seema. Let me qualify this by saying that, you know, echo chambers exist more and more in especially the online echo chambers exist more and more because I think it's a very basic human need for us to feel like we belong to a community. Right? And so the sense of belonging, the shared values, shared beliefs, all of those help us come together. I mean, unless I'm not knocking this at all, but you know, there's a lot that we can learn from those of us, or even in ourselves, a certain introvertedness that we may have to keep our beliefs or ideas to ourselves, to be more reflexive. But an echo chamber can serve a lot of very good needs because you need to know that the points of view that you are believing in are shared. I think where this turns dangerous in these online conversations and social media is when a point of view that you are expressing, which may have certain disinformation, you know, to take on the previous question, to have certain misinformation or disinformation attached to it, when that gets magnified more and more, when people applaud you and, you know, pat you on your back over and over again for saying, oh yeah, we agree with you, you get this false sense of belief that actually you're right. And hey, everyone's agreeing with me, I must be really right here. There's a lot I think we can learn about how to tackle these echo chambers without necessarily engaging in a violent, and I mean violent in a very broad way, a violent verbal behavior, violent behaviors in online interactions where we descend into ad hominem attacks. You see, these echo chambers, all they need, and I know that this metaphor is going to fall flat, all these echo chambers need is a little hole in which we can peek in and listen. So imagine, for example, that you are you have a certain viewpoint about COVID-19 and the COVID-19 vaccine, and you strongly believe that we need to fund the creation of this vaccine in the short and in the medium term so that in the long term we can build resilience to it. And then you have a whole other group of people who have the belief that you know, this is not as serious or just as serious as the flu. We need to ride this out, and we need to stop government control of our lives. All right, and you know, I think both are selectively but valid viewpoints that we need to consider. But in each of these echo chambers, you're going to hear these viewpoints more and more resonate and magnify. But suppose a person from the group that believes in vaccines is able to listen to the group that is talking about government control without necessarily entering that echo chamber and participating. You're going to be able to listen to and hear the rationale and logic that is being used. What we see on social media is a complete ridiculing, right? If these two kinds of people meet each other, they start calling each other names. They will propagate and provide news items and viewpoints which may be valid, but that represent their own point of view over and over again. But think about how useful it might be for us to peek in and to listen or to watch without necessarily interfering. So in literature about social psychology and even in business literature, there is this concept known as communities of practice, where people get together to learn about how to solve a specific problem in a workplace. But not everyone has the expertise to participate in these discussions. So what is known as the legitimate peripheral participants, so people who surround the issue are listening in, but are then saying, oh, hey, this resembles a context in which I may be able to apply this to my own workplace, but I don't need to feel pressure to keep listening in and participating. I think we can start building some sort of some sort of way in which we can legitimately peripherally participate in these discussions, so that you can actually listen to another viewpoint and go back to your own group and say, hey, you know what? There's something to be said about government control. Are we really sure that we all need to be on complete lockdown here? Look, I'm not advocating for this. But imagine if that question is asked by someone who has listened to a viewpoint and said, maybe, there's the reason why schools are still open, but the fact that that we're not going to work is because children are less susceptible to COVID-19, that research is not yet, hasn't yet borne fruit in this issue. I think that we tend to sometimes place too much trust in knowledge and too little trust on intuition, and also vice versa. So all I'm suggesting here to get rid of this, I don't think it's a problem to have echo chambers, but to get rid of the attacks that are perpetrated because of echo chambers is to, again, take a step back and listen. Just listen, and then take your time to react to it. And this is not a very popular opinion. I know that in my classes, when I talk about this, I know that a lot of students who engage in activism say, well, we don't agree with that, because it's really important for us to step in right now because we have suffered long enough. And you can't argue with that either. I would not argue with them about that. I would be like, you know what? If that's what you need to do, you should go ahead and do it.
Well,
really interesting.
Just sorry, Massimo, just one remark. I think as someone working for IDP, that is an organization that is working very hard to bridge the gaps and to actually start a conversation. That's why it's called Dialogue Platform. I think this is so extremely important because, I personally, I totally can. I'm totally with you on the approach. Doesn't matter the topic that's being discussed, or it doesn't matter my opinion on a specific topic, but the point where we are not even willing or able to listen to someone else's opinion, that's where I think it gets very, very tricky and more bipartisan. We can now see it in with the elections in the United States. You're either a Democrat or a Republican, and there's hardly any coming back from that. You're either with Black Lives Matter or you're not. You're putting on a mask on the street, or you're the one that ridicules people putting on a mask in the supermarket, and it's so divisive. So yeah, I think it's actually maybe a quality that we could all learn from, no matter whether we agree with one standpoint or another. Sorry, Massimo, what did you want to?
Yeah, no, I think also there is a psychological dimension in that, the fact that everyone naturally takes a position in that. For instance, I am for, I'm against something, but of course we have to learn like dialogue and to not appreciate maybe, but just to be curious of the positions of the others. So I completely agree with Vivek. And I would like also to like come back to what we mentioned at the very beginning. That is the social, the civic engagement and political participation on the part of population. Because in Europe, but also in other parts of the world, let's think of the Arab Spring, for instance. Like social media had to play a major role in revolutions, and also political participation. And if you see also the political agenda of some parties in Europe, sometimes the anti-establishment parties, maybe like Five Stars in Italy, just an example, you see that the social media have been regarded as an instrument to foster democracy, as an instrument through which population can influence political decisions. So I don't know, the result today is not so clear for me, in the sense that I don't see how social media can play a role in democratizing the society. So I would like to know from you if you are like optimistic in this sense. So you think that maybe social media can substitute some institutes of democracy, or like power will kept in the corridors of power, like.
Yeah. See, I really like this line of questioning as well, because it also brings me back to some pieces that I had written very early on in my career, which talked about the potential for social democracy to open up avenues for social media to open up avenues for democracy. And especially because there was this promise, and I think that promise still exists, to democratize information, to democratize knowledge, right? But as is the case with any form of, I guess, information exchange, when there's so much of information that needs to be parsed, then you sort of become inundated and you become numb to everything that you are confronted with in order to process a particular frame of reference, and then to also adopt a frame of reference in making arguments about issues like political change. I think that social media on the whole should be thought of as another means of communication, another tool for propaganda, another way in which a message can be brought forth, a way to learn from and to learn about different points of view, which is not done often enough. But there's no doubt that several grassroots movements, including the Arab Spring, as you pointed out, and then there are smaller movements that have taken place in specific parts of the world. Social media has enabled those particular movements to take place. But I think to sort of finish off my answer, one thing to keep in mind here is that a lot depends on the capacity of the population, first of all, to have the kind of broadband access that is necessary in order to communicate on social media, and to also exploit its full potential through the use of videos and images and audio. There is a really dark side to this, right? There's a dark side to the misinformation, and I'm thinking of the reports, consistent reports that I've read about the use of WhatsApp in South Asia. So I was born in India, and the majority of my family still lives in India, and there's cases of misinformation being spread on WhatsApp to a wide variety of populations. And because a very large proportion of the Indian population actually skipped the telephone landlines and moved to mobile media quite quickly, there is a lack of appropriation of any type of critical digital literacy around this work. So people take at face value the information that's provided to them. So fake news and disinformation about people, either of joining certain political allegiances or having intercaste relationships, have led to violence and even death in those cases. So I think you need to be mindful about promoting social media as an agent of political change, as an agent of any type of cultural or societal change. Again, I'll go back to my initial response. Technology on its own cannot be either a panacea or an evil agent. I think it is the ways in which we adopt and the ways in which we embody this technology that dictate to what extent these can be used for promotion of human rights and human values. But yeah, it's such a pertinent question. Really good question, actually. I almost want to ask that question as an essay assignment for my classes now. It's a really good question.
Thank you. Yes, it's not an easy matter. This kind of topics, I see a lot of ambivalence, of ambiguity. I mean, the result, as I said before, the result is not clear. I mean, of course, speaking about Arab Spring, okay, you can say like social media had like a positive effect, if you say maybe from on the part of some sections of the populations. But on the other hand, maybe like since human beings are the users of these tool, of course, it cannot be like the medicine for everything. It cannot solve all the problems. And also another dilemma, which is not the social dilemma of the documentary, but another dilemma I see is in the relationship between political class and citizens when it comes to trust. For instance, one would say that maybe social media has has spoiled the trust between these two categories. Maybe because now we see that like the critics are increasing on the part of population against the government. So you see that there is not a lot of trust in Europe. But on the other hand, if you see there is like a direct relationship between politicians and people and citizens, because the role of journalists is really less important than in the past, because the politician can use social media and speak directly to the population. So this can be considered as an instrument to foster maybe democracy. So also here I see that it's not clear the result of the consequences of social media. Also here I see like ambiguity. I don't know your opinion about it.
See, this again, a very pertinent question, and I don't think I have a clear answer to it. But I won't spend too much time pondering it. The issue, I think, is the speed at which the political class is expected to respond to issues of import, and also the expectation from the public that they're going to hold you accountable for what you say on social media. I think one of the dangers there is that, if you think of the pandemic, I think that science and policy needs to react to the information and knowledge that is currently being created around how we can combat and equip ourselves to be resistant to the pandemic, right? Whether it's public health, whether it's public policy, education, culture, whatever that may be. But the moment you use social media to state a viewpoint, people are going to dig that up and say, "Oh, you changed your mind now? How come that's the case? 2 weeks ago you said this." Well, why not? Why am I not allowed to change my point of view based on information that is being presented to me? So the problem here is that we're expecting politicians and our policymakers to do the best for us, which I think they do have in mind for the most part, right? And I'm speaking about okay. In general, I'm hoping, right, this is my hope, that politicians have the best in mind for their populations, for their constituents, and that they should be allowed to change their mind. I mean, paradigmatic ways of thinking in science calls for us to be able to modulate and be flexible and be agile about this work, right? So we need to be mindful that once something's out there in social media, it's not going away. And so the trust and the deterioration, or the emboldenment of the trust that we see in our politician class, it's become like a game, right? It's become like a game that you play to see, all right, to what extent am I going to do this and lose some followers, lose some political clout, and on the other hand, to what extent is this policy in fact going to help keep us healthy? Those are, I think, the arguments you made. I mean, I don't have any aspirations for politics or to be in that kind of position. mainly because I feel that they're, in a certain sense, our politicians are held to a very different standard than the general public, and these standards are so fluid and so esoteric that I don't think that I'm cut out for that kind of work.
Thank you. It's really amazing, this field, like the political dimension of social media. Really,
Yeah.
really amazing. Thank you.
I would like to go to the last question. We have so many more. This might actually need a part two. But what I can say, or what I can summarize a bit from what we've heard so far, is that social media can be a wonderful tool, and it's neither utopia nor dystopia. It depends on its dynamics with society and how indeed we adopt it. For the last question, I wanted to go a little bit more philosophical. We've been discussing or thinking about the freedom of thought, because since social media kind of offers these rabbit hole experiences, and the, how to say it, the algorithms know so very well, and so more and more specifically what we like, or who we are as people, and what we're likely to watch, and what type of content we're going to consume. Do you still think we can speak of freedom of thought or freedom of choice in social media? And should we be questioning our own critical thinking skills? Also, given the abundance of information, not only misinformation or disinformation, but also the huge amounts of information that we can consume on a daily basis.
Yeah, a really loaded question, and I appreciate it. But if you'll permit me, I guess to allow me to also phrase this in philosophical terms. You see, our group, the UNESCO chair that I help direct, the work that we're doing in another initiative that's called Project Someone, that focuses specifically on social media and on sensitizing the public to online hate, but also the work that we're doing in primary prevention of polarization or radicalization. We draw a lot of our inspiration from Paulo Freire and his specific work along pedagogy of the oppressed, because the majority of ways that I have learned to think and process information and behave, even in communal ways, is based on a certain patriarchy and a certain hierarchy of knowledge, right? I mean, if you think about it, any form of capitalist ways of thinking and knowing are reliant on increasing levels of knowledge being possessed by a specific hierarchy, right? Wherever they may arise. So some of you talked about the question of anti-establishment and the elites, and we belong to this kind of system. So the majority of work that I'm trying to do now, and I don't pretend to say that I can unlearn the ways in which I've learned. I can't. I mean, I've learned to operate in specific ways, but by surrounding myself with perspectives and by being open to listen to those whose voices are have been oppressed and suppressed the most, and giving them an opportunity to express their viewpoint, I think I'm learning about how we can build a certain sensibility, a sensitivity to how social media can in fact be much more engaging and much more beneficial to a broader population. I think we're only scratching the surface right now in terms of how we can build truly activist ways of thinking and knowing within social media without necessarily putting each other down. And you do this, I think you do this in conscious ways. For me specifically, because I'm not personally on social media, and I use social media, and I help manage some of the accounts that we run for our UNESCO chair, for Project Someone. I make sure that these accounts are always reading and being fed with information from Indigenous communities in Canada, for example, from work that's being conducted by the United Nations in Africa, in South Asia, in the global South, trying to understand better how traditionally communities that have been ignored because of a certain Occidental way of thinking that we are used to, and I count myself as part of that system, the Occidental way of thinking. If we can surround ourselves with those voices, be sensitive to them, then I know that when I operate within my own political structures, when I speak to my colleagues, when I engage with groups of people who are having difficulty in expressing, or at least having their voices heard, I know that I can be more sensitive to that point of view. So, I'm not going to say anything different after 45 minutes of talking to you about this that won't resonate with you, I think, because I think we're on the same page about this. But taking a step back and allowing the platforms that we have to be occupied by those who think differently from us, I think is the best way for us, I think, to ensure that critical thinking flourishes. So not just our own critical thinking, but other people's critical thinking flourishes. So I guess in a roundabout way, I think that's how our work should be defined. And it's not just that Paulo Freire's work is so inspirational, but also that his way of thinking and his concept of teaching with as opposed to teaching to is something that we must try and embody more and more. And I think my only regret is having thought this way or having discovered this work later on in my career. But I guess better late than never in my case.
Thank you. Thank you so much.